Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and in today's episode we will be heading back into the corridors of power to talk to Mike Reeder, Member of Parliament for Northampton South and Chair of the All Party Parliamentary Group on Infrastructure. And after my recent conversation with Sarah Jones MP, Minister of State for Business and Net Zero, it will be interesting to contrast the government view of the nation's infrastructure ambition with one from Parliament's backbenches. Well, certainly there's no question that this government has infrastructure investment firmly in its sights when it comes to delivering on its ultimate mission for economic growth. We hear no end of plans about refocusing on and accelerating delivery of nationally significant infrastructure projects. But we also know local infrastructure improvements are what really turns voters' heads, be they improved bus services, tackling potholes, improving schools and hospitals, or indeed providing new homes. And of course, we also know local infrastructure impacts, be they pylons on the skyline or rail tracks through the pastures, can and do have a major impact on deliverability. And navigating this difficult route from infrastructure aspiration to reality so often falls on the desks of an army of backbench MPs representing a myriad of interests, I suppose some for and some against proposals. So let's talk to one of those backbenchers. Mike, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, let's kick off. I mean, this time last year, Mike, you were working as a work-winning director at contracting and consulting giant Mace. Fast forward, and you're an MP for Northampton South. Quite a change. I mean, how has the last 7 months panned out for you?
It's a whirlwind, I have to say, Anthony. The first few months of being an MP, you are not only trying to get to grips with parliamentary procedure and all the setting up of government, but also trying to do all the jobs that you eventually recruit staff for. So casework, comms, understanding briefings, getting to know local stakeholders. It's been a whirlwind. And I hoped Christmas would be a bit of a break. I did get a little bit of a break at Christmas, but in all honesty, we're still only just getting onto a level footing with the amount of work that we have to do.
Yeah. Well, we hear a lot about the challenges and rewards of being a Member of Parliament. I mean, clearly you're not new to local or national politics, but how's the reality compared to the aspiration? Is it harder?
It's really early days. Is it harder? I mean, I worked hard at Mace. I'm very fortunate to be on the leadership team at Mace. In the consulting business, and we work really hard in the construction industry. And I think what I've found is that has set me up for the level of work needed to be an MP. And I think colleagues who maybe have come from different backgrounds, charities, local government, maybe haven't experienced having to work at the pace you do as an MP. So I've never been shy of hard work, but it certainly has been a great opportunity to come into government and to be part of the party that now is responsible for the country.
Yeah, well, I described the government's infrastructure ambition, and I presume it makes it a very interesting time to be an MP, with an infrastructure background.
Yeah, I mean, I could have come into a government who said our big ambition is, number one mission is education reform or healthcare reform. And right. I wouldn't have felt as comfortable in being in with the government who, whilst they'll have education, healthcare and national security on their key focus areas, those big pillars that we're working towards, growth and delivering infrastructure and housing being front and centre of both the manifesto that people voted for and now the government's programme in terms of what we do. So I feel very at home, actually, and it's quite nice, I've got to say, to be able to talk about stuff that I know a little bit about.
But as a backbench MP, I mean, you have local constituency interests front and centre. But on so many issues, particularly around infrastructure, there are nationally significant considerations that have to take centre stage. I mean, how do you balance those competing demands when representing your constituents?
You find that generally national issues actually you can find a link to benefit your constituents locally. I have a plan, and I'm a project manager at heart, engineer at heart, so I have a detailed plan of what we're doing, and we have written down in a PowerPoint deck constituency focus and parliamentary focus, and there is alignment between the two. But we split our time, split our effort, and we use parliamentary mechanisms to progress local issues, and likewise in the constituency, I will do things that are focused on constituency issues, but also I probably, more than most MPs, spend my time visiting housing development, talking to Network Rail, and talking about potholes in the constituency, because they're interesting things that align with my priorities in Parliament.
Yeah. Well, meanwhile, back on the national stage, I suppose you chair the APPGI, the All Party Parliamentary Group on Infrastructure, and that highlights the importance of economic infrastructure in the UK amongst parliamentarians, the government, and industry. Infrastructure is certainly back in fashion. How does the APPGI help? What's it up to right now?
So just for your listeners who don't maybe not know, so all party parliamentary groups are a mechanism in government that brings together Lords and MPs from all parties to focus on specific issues. And there's actually they've tightened up the rules a lot now, without being political in your podcast. Perhaps the previous government, so there were some people who used them for free holidays and perhaps less above board reasons. So they're quite strict now. You've got to have a certain number of MPs, you've got to be quorum, you've got to have representatives in your officer group from both the government and the main opposition. So actually it truly is cross-party. You can't have a singular focus. And so I have Tories on my officer group alongside me. But we work, I guess, partly as a scrutineer and a challenger to government. So we will take on inquiries or pieces of research with industry to look at areas of government policy and provide guidance, feedback, support, or challenge to government where we think we need to. And also to provide, I guess, a forum as well for industry to engage in government. And if there are big challenges facing the infrastructure sector that we have to respond to as an industry, and we provide a conduit through which industry has another route to influence government policy, whether it's on skills, supply chain, government policy on methods of construction, infrastructure strategies, all the rest of it.
Right, because, Chancellor Rachel Reeves certainly went big on her support for infrastructure delivery in her growth speech a couple of weeks ago. When I spoke to Sarah Jones, the Minister for Construction, she absolutely committed to infrastructure as the driver to meet this mission for growth. Does it surprise you that the government is throwing so much political capital behind infrastructure as the driver for growth?
No. I saw it at Mace across the world. Governments post-pandemic sought to grow themselves out of the pandemic and the economic crisis that followed through investing in infrastructure. And when I was at Mace, I was working on, some of my last projects were the metro in Hong Kong. It was the Hudson Tunnel crossing in New York, major programs and giga programs in the Middle East. And so actually this government is now serious in taking decisions on complex infrastructure that have been stalled for a while. And we'll talk in a bit, I'm sure, about some of the details of that. But actually, it's not just the sexy projects that have been sat within the DCO process, the planning process for years, but actually it's projects that are really critical to national sovereignty and security in terms of energy and water and the like.
We heard about support, as I say, for runway R3, East-West Rail, Oxford-Cambridge Art, Lower Thames Crossing, new reservoirs. How do you see, what is the role of the APPGI, I suppose, in helping the government turn this lovely wish list, into the promised 10-year infrastructure strategy and actually delivering it?
Well, we may not have a role in that initially. So government will publish that strategy based on a lot of the consultation it's done with industry, and it's going to be a spatial strategy. So that will include civic infrastructure as well as the infrastructure we talk about, roads, railways, power, water, etc. And that's the first time it's ever been done to say this is what we need where. And also alongside of that is kind of a more space-based approach on where do we invest in terms of sectors. I'm sure every single council wants to be a digital innovator, but actually where does that really sit in the UK, and how do we become more focused on spatial strategy, which is what we see other big developed nations much better at doing, whether it's, in America, there are certain states, that's what they do. Whereas the UK, we kind of have that, like construction, you have a mix of everyone does a bit of everything and no one's a specialist. So what I mean, make sure we're spatially focused. But the APPGI will, work with government to kind of hold it to account, to challenge, to support. But also we're going to do some thinking around things like the formation of NISTA. How can we support on the skills challenge, productivity challenge, particularly that the construction sector has, and bring ideas from industry through research, through inquiries, through events, roundtables, etc., to make sure that this remains on the top of the DBT and the Treasury and everyone else's agenda to make sure that now we've committed to these major infrastructure investments that we deliver them.
And I imagine it also means bringing the infrastructure supply chain and making sure that their role is upfront and central when supporting this growth ambition.
Very much so. And so one of my other roles within my role in Parliament is I'm a business champion for construction on behalf of the government. So I was appointed last week, and through that I've chosen actually to focus on SME tier ones and tier twos in the infrastructure space, because there are some amazing tier ones operating in the space, but they probably have the ear of government. And actually, as you all know, Anthony, and your listeners know, a lot of innovation in construction comes from the supply chain. And so I'm going to have a much bigger focus from my business champion role on behalf of the government on talking to SME and tier 2, tier 3 infrastructure contractors and suppliers, etc., to understand how they think we can go faster. Because it's great listening to the likes of Skanskas and Balfours and BAM, etc., but actually I want to also hear from those tier 2, tier 3s and the smaller firms who are delivering a lot of the infrastructure that people see every day: roads, potholes, electricity, gas upgrades, etc. So really important we listen to the whole supply chain, not just perhaps the firms that have big public affairs groups that work for them.
No. Well, I hadn't appreciated that new role of yours, but I get a feeling that your mailbag is going to be quite big on that one, because I know there's an awful lot of businesses out there who are, they've got lots of ideas. It's just how do they get them out there, making these things happen. Let's talk about some other issues that are likely to, I suppose, come on your radar. I mean, one of them clearly is planning reform. When I spoke to the Construction Minister, Sarah Jones, last week, she kept repeating the phrase, "We cannot keep saying no." I mean, how do you see the forthcoming planning and infrastructure bill really transforming our approach to infrastructure delivery?
I think Sarah is right. There is a lot of stalling of much needed critical infrastructure that stalls for reasons that aren't in the interest of the country. And the planning process, rightly so, has protections in for local people. But when you talk about critical national infrastructure, there is a national reason why we're delivering that. And sometimes the planning or the DCO process can delay delivery of things that critically will reduce people's bills or improve people's security of supply for water, energy, etc., gas. So I see it coming through with trying to make sure that we listen to industry. And industry has been talking for years about how painful the planning process is. I experienced it firsthand at Mace, and before that when I was at Pick Everard. Industry's been saying to government for years reform it, and this government's going to get on and do it. So I hope industry will stick its money where its mouth is and say, this is what we wanted, and now we'll get behind it and support it.
But I imagine not at any cost. I mean, there's been various mutterings about ripping up the environmental rule book, etc. I mean, as an infrastructure professional, I imagine that you wouldn't necessarily want to go down that route.
No, I mean, there is a political angle that is made around whether we're going to run roughshod over the environment, but this government has five core missions, of which one is energy and the environment, in terms of clean energy and protecting our environment, improving biodiversity. So we can't do one without the other, and that's the critical thing. And as engineers and people in industry will know, it's a lot more complex and a multifaceted thing, delivering projects. And so it's about finding the right balance. You have to question how the environmental challenge on Heathrow or other major programs, does that actually benefit the delivery and the outcome we get, or does it just create work for lawyers and years of legislation and years of uncertainty for people that will be impacted by the projects? I think we need to get away with that approach and make sure that we're working in the interest of the country.
Yeah. Well, I noticed that. I saw Robbie Owen, Pincer Mason's lawyer and planning guru. He actually had a letter in the Times the other day highlighting perhaps the need for Parliament to step up a bit more and make a lot more of these decisions parliamentary decisions. Is that something which you might support?
I think there are times when the Secretary of State needs to step in and make decisions on planning, DCOs and those types of things. But I think where possible, those decisions should be made locally. Right. And some of the minor things that have been brought in by this government already, requiring planning training for planning for councillors working on appointed to planning bodies. Simple things like that, so they actually understand the law that they are represented to respond to. It sounds so simple, right? But you've got Bob, Jane and Sally who have volunteered to be a local councillor, and they've got no experience in industry at all. And then they're making decisions on planning quite often based on emotion rather than the legal case, which means that things are delayed. They go to arbitration, appeal, and then it costs the taxpayer loads of money, and the developer still, because they understand the process, still gets the project anyway. So we've got to stop those sorts of things, because it just costs us all money, and none of us want to see our taxes wasted.
Yeah. Well, as a backbench MP, I suppose you're very aware of the need to balance those local needs with national needs. But the reality is that, government has to convert the vast amounts of infrastructure investment and ambition into tangible benefits for the public, to make the people's lives in your constituencies better, or risk being booted out of the office in the next 5 years. And consequently, MPs like you losing their jobs. Given the current delivery challenges, is it something you worry about, Mike?
I don't know. I'll always do what's right for my constituents. The big things that face my constituents every day are cost of living. And I know that our focus on clean energy will help people with their energy bills long term. It's housing availability. It's when people are renting, particularly, we've got a lot of renter issues. So the Renters' Rights Bill the government's brought forward. And it's security of work. And so the Workers' Rights Bill is going to make a massive difference to all those people in Northampton who work in logistics, distribution, retail, which are kind of key anchor sectors in my constituency and the surrounding area. And the government's focus on growth, and the announcements last week on backing the Oxcam corridor, which includes Northampton, will mean that we see tech, manufacturing, advanced manufacturing businesses being really encouraged to invest in the area. And I've met with Segro, Prologis, a number of the big developers who develop these kind of warehousing and manufacturing spaces, and they're so keen to invest in areas like Northampton. So actually, I see a real positive for areas like mine, that we're going to see better jobs, lower bills, and hopefully when people come to the ballot in 5 years' time, that's what they remember, that actually they can feel something better in their pocket.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a bit more about you, Mike. You're a Member of Parliament for Northampton South. You met a seat that you won in July 2024 from a Conservative incumbent. Possibly due to a split in the Tory vote with reform, but, discuss. This political career, it came after nearly 20 years in civil engineering, and I think you entered politics through Labour's Future Candidates programme. What prompted the change in direction?
Northampton is what they call a bellwether. So generally, when the government is Labour, Northampton South is a Labour seat, and when it is a Conservative government, Northampton South is a Conservative seat. Now, 2005, it did go Conservative early, but there have been significant boundary changes and significant demographic changes. And actually, we do a lot of work to understand the vote. So whilst there was a split in the Conservative vote, actually there was a lot of people who moved, or some people, a significant chunk who moved from Labour to Reform as well. That kind of Brexit vote, hardcore Brexit vote. And we also saw a lot of movement as well from Liberals and Greens into Labour, because people felt that actually they needed to vote for change and support the party. So the next election will be very, very interesting, I'm sure. What prompted the change? So I joined the party in 2015, Labour Party, and I did that out of frustration. So I was working at Pick Everard at the time on public procurement through organisations like Crown Commercial Service and Escape. And I just saw, public bodies stretched to the hilt with all austerity, not being able to afford to upgrade schools, deliver the public infrastructure that we needed. And so how do I make change? Well, I thought I'll join a political party, and Labour was the one that kind of more closely aligned to my beliefs. And then I got involved in the referendum, and I campaigned to remain in Northamptonshire, which was certainly challenging. And then 2019, I really did feel like we let the country down. We didn't propose a manifesto or a proposition from Labour that reflected what people wanted. We listened to our own internal voice rather than what people really, really needed at that point. And we ushered in the era of Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. So, if you think frustrating 2015, angry and disappointing 2019, and then so when Future Candidates programme came up, I put my name forward. I was supported by a couple of quite senior people in the Labour Party to say this is something you should do. And that was the idea of that, was to bring people from outside of the political bubble, if you like, into potentially standing to be councillors, Senate members, MSPs, or even MPs. And I was very fortunate that it gave me the tools that when a seat came up in Northampton, where I live, I was well positioned to run a quite grueling selection campaign, because you're campaigning against your colleague, your friends, really. to be selected. There were 4 of us running the shortlist, which is quite a big shortlist. So it was good fun, though, I've got to say.
No, but it's you came to politics relatively late, because you studied at Loughborough before joining Pick Everard as a graduate. You did a master's at Coventry, and then you were work-winning director at Mace. I mean, clearly you've been involved in a whole lot of different things over the 17 years. But leaving the industry, I mean, do you miss it?
Yes and no, because I'm doing so much around the industry. I don't feel like I'm kind of losing touch, and I'm really fortunate. I've got lots of friends who I can kind of bounce ideas off, ask questions off. I just before we came on, a CEO of one of the largest procurement organisations in the UK messaged me just, to pick my brains on something and to offer some advice on something else. It's really nice, actually, that people are just leaning in and helping.
Yeah,
and maybe that's the great thing about being someone from industry, is that actually it breaks down the barrier for people to engage and put ideas in, and then I can take those into the kind of mechanisms of Parliament. I think I miss the work winning side a little bit, but campaigning really is like work winning. I mean, my organizer Theo used to take the mickey out of me. He said, "I can't project manage you," but I did have, I had a Gantt chart on the wall of what we needed to do. There was a full schedule, a full campaign plan written out, like we would do a bid, like a bid plan. Those skills I've learned through doing work winning in industry definitely translated to having a very structured campaign.
Well, an MP's workload is, I imagine, quite high. I mean, how has your life changed for you and is your wife Katie, isn't it?
Yeah. So we tried to not let it change too much. As I said at the very beginning, I was working a lot with Mace. Post-pandemic, not a lot of travel overseas, because Mace is a net zero or carbon neutral business and wanted to make sure we reduced our business travel. So even though I was doing projects around the world, I just had very late nights or very early mornings when working internationally. But we try and kind of box out some time every week when I'm not working. And I generally do Sunday night till Thursday or Wednesday in London, and then go back to Northampton for Fridays, do my surgeries, Saturday do my visits, and then have a bit of a kind of quieter time on a Sunday. So it hasn't changed too much.
And what do you get up to? What is spare time? What do you fill it with? Do you still have any hobbies?
I watch TV. Sounds really boring, but I am so behind on so many TV shows that generally in my spare time I sit on the sofa and watch TV. I used to swim loads, and I don't really swim much anymore. I do still cook. It's one of my passions. But honest answer is walk the dog and binge watch TV, whether it's like MasterChef or like a proper series on Netflix. I don't have that thing that perhaps people, you kind of don't take for granted a little bit, that you have the evening to just sit down for a couple of hours and watch a bit of telly. Like, my day doesn't finish generally till 10 o'clock. I start around 8 a.m, 9 a.m, and I finish about 10 o'clock most days. I don't watch TV anymore, and I missed it. So I watch telly.
Right. And what sort of dog you got?
A little short Shih Tzu Yorkshire Terrier cross. It's called a Shorkie. Don't put Shih Tzu and Yorkshire Terrier the other way around. So go Shorkie rather than the other way.
All right, I'll bear that in mind. Let's get on to some of your backbench work. I mean, you're a member of the Energy Security and Net Zero Committee. What's the purpose of that role? What do you get up to there?
Yeah, I am, and actually, I am heading off to question Chris Stark today. So, as SNS Committee's meeting today, who's the kind of lead of the central mission control function within government. So select committees are a function of government that generally are there to scrutinise government either by department, so ESNES, department, we scrutinise the Department of Energy, Security and Net Zero, or there are some that are kind of public accountabilities. There's like environmental audit, public accounts, etc., who scrutinise government. And we're there to be, I would like to think of as a critical friend. So we run a series of inquiries where industry can kind of submit papers. And so, for example, we've got inquiries at the moment on warm homes, and we've got views from across industry, and then we have a group of clerks who will pull that together, do some evidence sessions, and we'll produce a report. Or we do kind of what we do every single week is we pull in senior figures to quiz them and ask difficult but constructive questions. And I've got a couple lined up today, which are I'm looking forward to.
Well, I know it's got a number of inquiries underway, one of which is looking at retrofitting homes for net zero. It's an important but tricky area. Certainly, I'm a trustee of the Built Environment Trusted Building Centre, and we've got an event on the 12th and 13th with the Housing Festival. You can drop down and have a look at that we appreciated. But, it is an important area. But why is it so hard for the UK to improve its building stock?
We do have an older building stock that is more challenging to retrofit and costly to retrofit, and that isn't helped by high level of supply chain costs, high level energy costs, the cost of borrowing, perhaps not being where most people want to be. But it is a big challenge to convince people to spend now to save later, and that is a continual piece of comms, if you like, that government has to do to bring people on board, and particularly bring people on board who are less well off and disadvantaged. Because someone, and I'll be general here, but someone listening to your podcast would probably think, I'll get an air source heat pump and my boiler breaks because it's the right thing to do, and I know long term I'll save money. But if that's £5,000 or £6,000, or it's a lot less to get a gas boiler, there are people who would say, well, I don't care if it's the right thing to do. I need to do what's the cheapest thing to do, because I've got to put food on my plate and put petrol in my car. So there is a role for government to work out how do we provide the right mechanisms to make sure that no one is left behind in the green transition. And retrofit is one of the most challenging areas, I think, to do that.
Yeah. But of course, government's got a target of building 1.5 million new homes. Adding to that building stock, do you see that being hit? I
feel quietly confident that it will be hit. I mean, what's a home? So in London, a home is probably a one-bed flat. So, London has arguably easier or harder, depending which way you look at it, challenge to build those homes. We've got to do some work, particularly to improve speed and productivity of house building in the suburbs like Northampton, where the Competition and Market Authority has found that major house builders have slow housing delivery to maximise sales, and that can't quite be right if we're trying to hit 1.5 million. So there is work from government needed to make sure that we are finding incentives to build, but also there's a role for industry to really improve productivity, embrace modern method of construction, and buy into delivering these homes, because it is what people need. It is the number one issue in my inbox, is housing, whether it's landlord issues, social housing issues, or accessibility of new build housing.
Yeah, and I suppose the other side of that is we want it, but don't build it anywhere near us.
Well, yes and no, but I think the NIMBY stuff slightly is overplayed. Of course, in Northampton, there are some people who don't want to see those homes built, and argue sometimes because of the speed and the disruption of construction, it gets a bad name, and the impact on public services. You see your GP surgery suddenly doubling in number of people registered. And so we've got to make sure that we remove those blockers. And some of that's going to be changing the way the NHS funding works for GPs, sorting out dentistry contracts so people get NHS dentists, making sure we change some of the planning legislation change, so we think about spatial planning rather than individual small-scale developments, sort of 300-500 homes being considered in isolation when they look at road upgrades, road roundabouts, those kind of things. There are things we can do, but I think NIMBYism, actually, when you talk to people, they're not NIMBYs. They're just worried about the short-term impact on their quality of life.
Yeah. Boosting skills and productivity, you mentioned there. I mean, the government has, the industry has been trying to get better at delivering infrastructure projects for about 3 decades, going back to Latham in 1994. It's something you're very familiar with, having worked in the industry, but as a politician trying to create change, is that lack of delivery urgency now a frustration for you?
Yeah, it is. And it was a frustration for me and many of the leadership team at Mace as well. Mark Reynolds, who's now, I think he's group chairman, isn't he? Was so passionate about productivity. I remember doing work with him on smart motorways. We were doing a proposal, and so much passion about how do we drive up productivity, because that actually is how we're going to deliver things better. And whether it's Egan and Latham, I was chatting to someone yesterday about modernise or die, Mark Farmer.
Yeah,
there's been so many papers on this, and I don't actually have the answer as why we aren't able to solve the productivity challenge in construction. But it certainly it was a frustration for me in industry. And I think it's still a frustration now, and it could be the thing that unravels the government's commitments on infrastructure and housing.
Yeah, well, I was talking to the minister last week about the IPA merging with the National Infrastructure Commission to create NISTA in the spring. She was talking about it being the move to really embrace delivery and to take all the strategy that we've put together and to start delivering. Is that how you see it? I mean, do you see that kind of change really ramping up the delivery of infrastructure?
The creation of NISTA, I think, is a big step forward. Done right, and I reserve judgment because we haven't seen the full details, but have understanding some of the policy and the thinking behind it, and knowing some of the people that proposed that to Darren and Sarah when we were in opposition as part of Darren's review of major programmes delivery. I'm confident that the right thought is there, but getting the assurance piece of the IPA and the kind of delivery focused strategic piece of the NIC into one function, I think is a real positive. And if we can simplify, government quangos, departments, etc. for industry, that has to be a good thing because it creates accountability.
Well, I've got this vision, Mike, of you strolling in there and saying, look, it's all obvious. This is what we need to do. Any quick fixes that you saw that you've been offering?
There are much cleverer people than me that could do that stuff. I can certainly give some thoughts and advice on those types of things.
Well, technology and AI, that's certainly on the government's radar as the solutions to the industry's delivery woes. Are we working hard enough at that?
I think as I left industry, there was people starting to really embrace AI, and everyone kind of probably knows AI from ChatGPT and it writing an email for you or something. But actually some of the really clever stuff people working on at Mace and others is how do we automate some of the productivity and quality checking that we do on site, fire schedules and fire checking and the like. And I think it really will drive efficiency. But what industry has always struggled with, I think, is upfront investment, particularly for tier ones. It's a really low profitability game that they're in. And so actually spare cash to invest in, leaping forward with things like AI is often a challenge. And so the government is publishing an industrial strategy. And Sarah Jones described to me that construction is a foundational sector that goes across that strategy and shouldn't.
Yeah.
The fact that it's not in one of they have 8 verticals in this strategy of these kind of sectors we're going to focus on. Construction runs across that. Just because we're not recognised in one of the 8 verticals doesn't mean we're not important. And particularly that strategy means we focus things like R&D support so that our industry, I think, has been really under-supported by government in terms of R&D and investment compared to stuff like defence and automotive and others. And it's such a big
aerospace,
and aerospace is such a big employer. But it's spread across such a large volume of companies and subsectors. Industrial strategy should provide that focus of how we can drive forward. But there is also a role of industry, right? And I'd end on that. It's a role of industry to be more open with sharing. And I was a Constructing Excellence Collaborative Working Mentor, and there's all these great organisations that are there meant to share ideas, but really no one shares their ideas because we're still a competitive industry. And there's probably about 4 or 5 different companies doing exactly the same thing at one time. And if they just shared, we'd all move forward quicker.
And everyone would move up to a higher level and compete at a higher level. Just to finish off, Sir John Armitt always makes the point that politics is umbilically linked to infrastructure. To what extent do you see a role for you to help the infrastructure sector to perhaps better understand the world of politics?
Well, that's a good question, actually. I think hopefully podcasts like this help, and I spend a lot of time speaking to people in industry. It's quite fun in some respects to have those chats and challenge people, and they say, "Oh, government just needs to do this." And you say, but how would they do that? Everyone has ideas, but actually, it's how you do it is the critical thing, and implementation. So, hopefully, I can be a bit of a guide to people if they reach out and ask for help.
Yeah. Well, any advice for others looking to follow you into Parliament?
I would say it's like our industry in that there's a lot of hard work and a lot of networks that you have to build. Politics particularly is a very kind of personal relationship-based thing, but also it's a lot of hard work. I was quite fortunate to come into the party in 2015 and be elected as an MP 9 years later. A lot of people were in the party 20, 30 years, and same with the Conservatives. The Conservatives have what they call the A list, and they have kind of a approved list of people who they put into seats. Labour Party's a lot more democratic, but they still have things like future candidates, which help it didn't give me any, if you like, it didn't give me any kind of boost in terms of the actual democratic process of selecting candidates, but it certainly helped arm me with how to run the process. So each party, I think Lib Dems have an A list as well. They have a function which kind of puts the best and the brightest into seats, because all the parties know, although we are left some legacy MPs who've been here 40 years and have never known anything other than sitting in the chamber and debating and living in London, actually all the parties have recognised over recent years they need real people to come in and form a really diverse government in terms of thought and diverse in terms of experience. And so I would say, if you ever wanted to get involved in politics, just get involved in your local party and paying your dues, doing the hard graft in the rain, canvassing in winter, paying that 10 quid into a fundraising raffle so you can win like a bottle of wine that costs 3 quid from the local co-op. All those little things you do, building relationships, helping someone out with writing a leaflet or doing some phone calls to try and get people to come out and to an event. All those little things add up in building your reputation and building your relationships. Yeah.
Well, look, Mike, thanks so much for joining me. Fascinating insights. I do feel slightly more relaxed about the fact that there are people like you actually in at the heart of government who have got a really strong track record in infrastructure. So good luck with it all, and thanks for joining me today on the Infrastructure Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Mike. That is all we've got time for today on the podcast now, but there is more in the pipeline and more as we continue to probe the big issues faced across the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website, www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you'll find background information and all the latest podcasts to listen to and to share. But thanks for joining us today, and thanks again to Mike. I look forward to seeing you again very soon.